Hello, everyone. I'm Adriaan Jansen from Abbey Games, creators of Reus and Renowned Explorers and Godhood. And recently we released Reus 2. And I would like to talk with you about God games because we made a few of them, and we always get something to talk about when they release. There's always something that some people find off about God games. It's also a weird tag we will see in the future. It has a lot of emotional and historical baggage with it, but it's kind of hard to say what exactly is a God game. This will not only be about God games, it will also be about tags, genres, and finding games on Steam in general. Maybe you had it yourself that there is this game and it looked kind of cool. It's the vibe that you like, but when you're playing the game, it's not that the game is bad or the game is uninteresting, it's just not really what you thought it would be. Well, we have this quite often as we tend to make games that evoke something but are also quite original or different in their implementation. Um, and I want to talk a little bit about maybe other ways to look at your game, um, or to look at the games you want to buy and see if they are a right fit for you. And I'm going to do that through God games because that's something that we have done a lot in the future. So let's talk about genres and themes. So if you go to Steam and you open up the categories section, this is sort of what you will see. You'll see a special section that sort of makes a lot of sense to me. There's free to play, there's demos, there's VR, there is macOS, all that kind of stuff that is not really about the game, but it's more about the product. Is it playable on VR? Is it playable on the Steam Deck? Is it macOS friendly? All that kind of stuff. So that one makes a lot of sense to me. Then you have player support, which talks about with how many people you played. I think that's a very important segment of this category list because sometimes you want to play with friends, sometimes you want to be co-op, sometimes you want to be more competitive. There's a lot of good stuff in there that's really clear. Like if you're looking to play with friends on local or party, you go to the local and party category. So those two make a lot of sense. But then we have genres and themes. And that's where it gets a little bit complicated because I think they are tag based, but they're a little bit weird. So for example, on the themes you have stuff like space, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, a theme could be like Mass Effect, or it could be Stellaris, Kerbal Space Program, all games that are about space. Okay, they are vastly different, but at least they have the same vibe. If you're interested in space, you can go there. On the other hand, horror is already a little bit different because horror, yeah, there are multiple type of horror games because you could say like uh, an Elden Ring is horror, but there's a bunch of like real horror games that are about scaring you. It's already a little bit weird. And on the genre side, it also gets confusing because sometimes it talks about what you're doing. First person shooter, the camera controls, what are you doing exactly? Sometimes it's a little bit cultural, like a JRPG is different than an action RPG or an adventure RPG or a CRPG. And sometimes it's just downright a theme, like military. That could be anything. That could be an RTS, that could be a shooter, that could be a management game. Military is. But on the other hand, there's also people that's like, I want to play a military game, and then they already have a kind of feel about what they want. Maybe they want to play Arma or something like that. So there are a lot of these different genres and themes that kind of go through each other. And I don't know about you, but when I'm browsing through Steam, it can be a little bit confusing. For example, this is the simulation tab. So if I go to simulation, the simulation store page has these as sort of the hot items. I'm in the summer sale right now, and it's these games almost seem like they have nothing to do with each other. It's EA Sports, it's Chained Together, it's Euro Truck Simulation, Manor Lords, War Thunder, and The Sims. It's really, really, really hard to distinguish these titles from each other. And when you go to Simulation tab, you don't get necessarily the titles that you think you want. Maybe when you're thinking about simulations, you are thinking about sports games, or maybe when you're thinking about simulations, you are thinking about War Thunder. It is kind of hard to put all these games together and see them as, oh yeah, these are all simulation games. It makes it a little bit hard to navigate. However, you could defend in all of these cases that they are simulation games. They just simulate different things. So simulation is almost an extension of the theme that is with it. EA Sports, it's a simulation of a football club or being a football player. That, kind of informs a little bit what it is. It informs that it's the most realistic or a realistic interpretation of a certain theme. But it is not something that you probably will be looking for. You're probably not going into the simulation tab thinking, oh, I would like to play any semi-realistic simulation of anything really, but you'll still get this list. It's a little bit hard. And this is often the case with games. Like God games are not much different. Sometimes things do make a lot of sense. So if you go for the tag open world survival crafter game, these games all look a lot like each other. There's Raft, there's Rust, there's Ark, and there's Spell World. And even though they're all distinct from each other, you can kind of see the vibe. Most of them are first person, but they don't have to be. There is this open world thing that is really informative. Survival and crafting, which are two things that you do when you're playing the game, which are also very informative. It gives you a pretty clear picture of what you're going to do. It's also a little bit cheating because open world survivor crafter is almost like a game that has become its own genre with Rust or the Ark survival games. So, they're a little bit more copies of each other. If we go to, older categories or older genres, it can get really weird. So, God games, what are they? We have 4 God games here. We have Populous, we have Black and White, we have Roblox, and we have Reus too. And it's very hard to draw a line between these games. It's very hard to see what makes this one specific genre. They're all tagged as God games, and they are all God games by their own right. But for every one of them, you will find people that say like, this is not a real God game. I'm being bamboozled. Specifically, I remember with Black and White 2 release, which was much more of an RTS than Black and White 1. People were kind of upset that it became more of an RTS, that it became more action-oriented or war-oriented. It's not necessarily what they were looking for. But if we purely look at game mechanics or, vibes, that kind of stuff, it's becoming very complicated to do. So let's take a deeper look into these God games. So Populous, it has a lot of destruction. It's an RTS. You control a shaman and you build a little tribal village where you compete against the other shamans. And you try to destroy them. And the big appeal of the game is that even though you have a lot of people that are walking around and fighting on the screen, you also have these massive and very cool spells that to rain havoc. Your shaman is basically a superhero that has very cool abilities that she can unlock. Either a tornado or an earthquake, that kind of stuff. So destruction and RTS seem important parts of it. It's also very campaigny. It's a campaign game. There are multiple levels that you can do. As an RTS, you can also play it competitively, but I don't remember that being a big part of the game. And of course, terraforming is an important part of the game as well, because you can make land bridges and that kind of stuff. It's not like you're creating terrain. You're not creating nature or that kind of stuff. It's more that you're using the terrain to, create a land bridge, lower a mountain so you can climb on top of it, get a bit creative with that. So that's one typical, I would say, God game. However, Black and White is already quite different. It's still tagged as a God game. Again, destruction seems to be an important part. You can rain down chaos on your enemies or on your own followers if you want. But is it really an RDS? Is it really a builder? Is it really an RPG? It's kind of weird. It's a weird game. It's not really easy to see in what category it falls. You could say simulation, but simulation seems to be like a cop-out for many kinds of games. And there's definitely this thing about, fighting and destroying your enemies. But it's also a lot about building, doing silly quests for small people. There is a pretty big campaign that you can follow, so it's also still a campaign game. There is this big AI giant animal that you can raise that will, act a bit according to how you act. You're like raising a child, and that was a big part of the game, but it was a big part of the appeal, but not necessarily a very big part of the game. It was hard to control, depending on how you wanted to play the game. And one thing that it had that games like Dungeon Keeper also has, like this hand, which was very tactile. So it made the game a lot more. You felt more like God because you had a hand which you could grab stuff into the world, throw rocks around, that kind of stuff, pet your animal, slap it around, that kind of stuff. So already you can see it's very, very different from Populous in terms of playing the game. It's nothing like the comparison we saw with the open world survival crafter games, where the base of the game is mostly the same, but the nuances are different. I guess even worse with Worldbox. So Worldbox is arguably more of a sandbox or toy box than it is a game. Depends on how you play it, of course, but it's a big appeal of the game. You can just create anything. It's really a world building game, a sandbox world building game, where all these things are going to happen on your planet. You can summon a giant crab. You can rain down fire on your enemies as well. So destruction still seems to be a very important part of the game. And world building is something new. You're really creating something for the people to live on. You're also neutral, which is very different from the games we saw before. You don't necessarily have an enemy that you're fighting. And really has that anthill vibe. You're just looking at the people doing all the small little stuff around, and you can let them be, or you can interact with them to destroy them or put them apart. You're really just doing whatever you like with this little anthill of people. This is extremely different from the games you already saw before. A total different vibe, and maybe comes closer to like Roller Coaster Tycoon or Planet Zoo or Planet Coaster than it comes to a game like Black and White. And to make it even worse, we have Reus 2, which is a very different game in the sense that it's challenging. It is really, it has sessions. It has more like a roguelite, puzzle-ish kind of vibe to it. It's more associated to, let's say, a Slay the Spire than it is to a world box. It's definitely also a builder game. You're not destroying anything. There's no destruction, which is very different from all the other games that we just saw. Sure, you build nature, you build a planet, you expand your planet, make mountains, make forests, all that kind of stuff. But it's not necessarily a super sandboxy or creative game, right? A designer game, so to speak. So you put all these games together, and it becomes more and more unclear what a god game exactly is. And I also just didn't add more some of the smaller god games that have released, or other god games that have released that focus more on the colony sim, or Sim City is often also said to be a sort of a god game. It's a very nebulous genre which doesn't inform you as the player as much, and we can see that in the sales of Reus too. That there are a lot of people that enjoy it a lot, but there are also some people that think that they're going to get something and they get something else. Sometimes to their pleasant surprise, and sometimes they can say like, oh, this is not exactly what I was looking for, because I was actually looking for Black and White, or I was looking for Populous, or I was looking for Worldbox. Those are very different games. You could even say they're all different genres in themselves. So we can look at the traits and see if there is some overlap between them. So we had like God Hand, destructive power, prehistoric vibe, controlling nature, adoration. The colors green and blue, which when we did research about what is a God game, actually seems to be the most interesting or consistent part of God games. And this is world building part. And if you think about God games, all of these make sense, but again, they're not super informing about what you're actually doing. So if we put it together, we'll see that some things that actually you might think are essential to God games don't pop up in God games as often as you think. The adoration, God Hand, and world building, a lot of God games don't have any of those, or are missing one of those or two of those, which is a little bit weird for, you could defend any of those as being very important for a God game. makes it a little bit hard to talk about it. And then you have destructive power, prehistoric vibes, and controlling nature, which are things that are more commonly associated, and a lot of the games have them, but not all of them games have them either. And again, does this really inform you what you're playing? Destructive power, prehistoric vibe, control nature. Is that an RTS? Is that an RPG? Is that a simulation game? There's a lot to go back and forth with in here. The only thing that really seems to be quite consistent is the colors green and blue in the screenshots. It's kind of odd that what seems to define a God game the most, if also you look back to games like Goddess, it's the colors. It's the vibe that the game gives that you are in nature and that's what you're playing. A little bit odd. So on the other hand, we could say a god game is not really a game, it's just a theme. You could just like space is just a theme, god games is also just a theme, but that doesn't seem to be what people think or say. So I picked out a few of the reviews of Reus 2, and you can see that they talk about puzzle orientated gameplay with roguelike elements, a puzzle like roguelike. It's actually a tile placement board game. We have people call it world builder. We have people call it a simulation or management games. It's really all over the place, and it's kind of interesting to see how so many reviews try to categorize Reus 2 and how often they do it in different ways. They feel like they have to inform their fellow players. Like, no, what you're actually playing is this. What you're actually playing is that. It's of course very nice to see people do that, and that you can build on each other on the reviews, but it it doesn't show very well on the store page, for example. It's hard to read it, and it might make people a little bit afraid. Like, oh, I don't know if this is for me, and they might be missing out on a great game because they don't understand what the hell they're going to play. Actually, Steam is also some Valve actually also encourages you to show gameplay as often as possible because this is the big thing, right? Like if you're browsing through Steam and you're looking for a new game and you want to play something new and interesting and not like this is a game that you already know, then you still need to know what you're going to play. You could play a demo, but not all games have demos, and also from a developer perspective, demos can take a lot of time to upkeep. So you have to do with the screenshots, or you have to do with the description or with the video, and more often than not, those are not very helpful. They might be trying to showcase you something or be fancy about something, while actually what you just want to see is like a let's play or something like that. And even then, maybe one of you or some of you have played board games, and if you're in a board game store and you read about it, it's not the same as if you would like watch a video of the board game. If you watch a video of the board game, everything just seems confusing. There's a lot of tokens everywhere, or cards, or a big board, all that kind of stuff. You're not really gonna learn much from watching, um, at least not watching shortly a video about that board game. If you take the time for it, of course you can learn more about it. But if you're on Steam, you don't have time to watch a full video about the whole game and what it is, especially with the slower games like Crusader Kings or the more thinky games. It can be kind of hard to see what is exactly the appeal of this game. And you know, we have to, as game developers, we try to be clear about it, but it's not always so easy. And we have to use the tag system, but the tag system is used for a lot of things. It's a little bit hard for us to communicate with each other, like what are we really want from each other, or what can we really give to each other. So there's a lot of genre confusion, and this ends up with a meta space in Steam where the likes, like Souls-like, Metroidvania, Survivor-like, those are much easier for the gamer and the developer to communicate. If I say it's a Souls-like, you're like, oh, it's like Dark Souls, but the theming is different, or there's just this one little camera thing that is different, or the types of weapons are different. You're kind of forced to go that way. That's the easiest way for you to compare some things. Of course, there are some players that just get a kick out of it, of playing something entirely new. Like, I never knew this game. It looks kind of interesting. I like the theme, and I'll see what kind of gameplay it is. And those are really the avant-garde of gaming. Those are the people who try new stuff and find out if something is actually worth your time or not. But most of us just don't have the time to go through all the discovery queues and put all that time into figuring out if the game is good or not. We have limited time. There are so many good games out there. Maybe you already have so many good games in your library. Why would I try something new? So there's a big barrier there for innovative games or games that are off the beaten path to shine. And of course, players are looking for them, but how do we communicate that well? So board games, I think, also have this problem. I have here like a Dutch board game rating system that is on the cover of a lot of games here in the Netherlands when you have the board game. And it basically gives you information that is very relevant for you when you're trying a new board game. I mean, the top 3 ones are pretty clear, like how many players, how long does a game take, what is the appropriate age for playing this game. And then there's some things in Dutch. The first one is about interaction. How much interaction do you have with your other players, and how much can you obstruct them? How much can you fight against them? So Agricola doesn't have much of that, so it has 1 star. Then strategy. How much do you have to think about the game? High factor. Luck. It's not really a luck-based game, though there's some of it, but it doesn't feel like a luck-based game. And then there's bluffing, which is a little bit of a part of Agricola, but not that big. And this is quite inspiring to me because it means that if I go to a board game store and I like the theme of a game, I can just check this out and see if it's the kind of game that I want right now. So I'm in a thinky mood. I want to play a game that is sort of multiple single player with some friends that really like to optimize something. Agricola seems nice, but if I'm in want to have like a party game and play with our friends, you know, maybe the number of players is not right, maybe the number of interactions is not right. It doesn't mean it's a bad game, but I know a little bit better what I'm going to get. So could we do the same thing for games? Could we say in games as well that there is, better categorization, that we don't have to do it based on tags, which could mean anything, which could be theming, which could be genre, which could be with how many players you play it, or if it supports VR or not. Could we do something that's a little bit more informative? So I have a few sort of things that I often try to categorize a game when I'm looking to buy one. So these 2 are the first one is heads and hands, and the second one is commitment. So the first one, heads and hands, is what is the core action of the game? Is it thinking or is it doing? So a typical heads game would be Civilization. It's a game where the main thing you're doing is thinking. Sure, if you play with a timer on, or you're on multiplayer and you have to hurry about things, then your action speed also starts to matter. If you would pick a game like StarCraft, it would be, I would say, almost dead in the middle. Like, execution is just as important as planning. Well, if you play, let's say, Counter-Strike or that kind of stuff, even though, of course, every game has some form of hands and some form of heads, there's always some thinking involved and there's always some action involved. Counter-Strike would be really a hands game. You're very busy with being fast, good reaction time, but also games that are more meditative in state, that are more about doing than about thinking, which could be like a Stardew Valley or that kind of stuff. It will be more on the hand side. You will be more like, I'm doing stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's challenging at one point or another. Challenge is a different category, but it does inform you what you would be doing all the time. This is very informative because there are a lot of people that have very demanding mental jobs and then get home and they just want to zone out or do things. They want to grind their RPG stuff. They just want to do. They don't want to strategize too much. On the other hand, there are people who really could use some mental stimulation when they get home, or they have been busy with their kids all day, and they want to, really focus on something. That could be a puzzle, but that could also be a game that is, really about planning ahead, or thinking more about what you're going to do next, reading, all that kind of stuff. The second one is time commitment. So I think this is something that is talked a lot in Steam reviews, but it's not really categorized as something that players are looking for, even though for me it's one of the most important things. Sometimes I need a game that is snack sized, a game that I can play and it's either very short or it has short sessions. That could be a short game that only takes 1 or 2 hours to play, but it could also be a game like Hades where I can play for half an hour and then I can put it away and I can play half an hour again later without losing much of the context. While other games have long time commitments. I'm thinking about like a Crusader Kings or an Europa Universalis, a lot of Paradox games, city builders where you build up a big city and you take 15, 20 hours just to make that one city. Um, Creative games that you have to build a lot for it. Those are big time commitments. Uh, Typically, if you have a job, if you have demanding things you have to do because you're studying, um, the more you have to do, the shorter the time commitments you want to give. And the more time you have, the bigger the time commitment you want to have. Maybe you recognize that if you are on holiday, and I really want to pick up a big game. I want to pick up that JRPG that I was looking forward to play for a long time. Um, but it's seldomly categorized. People talk about replayability or they talk about shelf life, but it's not necessarily the same. If you're playing a Binding of Isaac or very, replayable game of short sessions, you might still play 200 hours. And that might be more than playing a JRPG, but the commitment that you have for a JRPG is much higher than the commitment you have for a roguelike. So it's not something we talk about quite a lot. And often players have to figure out that it's the one or the other. And there is this other one from Quantic Foundry, which I like a lot myself, which is player motivation. So why am I playing a game? I think this may be one of the most important things about gaming. Why am I playing a strategy game? Why am I playing a Civilization and not playing a GTA? And they have these nice categories, or they have like 6 main categories, and they have 12 subcategories that talk about what you would like as a gamer. Maybe you already did the Quantic Foundry, what kind of gamer tests are you? And I think they're quite helpful. I will take some examples for this to see how it works out. So they put people in different categories. They have, I think, 9 categories. So, for example, you have the architect. They want to build something over time. They don't like seeing destroyed. They don't necessarily want a competition. You have the gardener, which is really about collecting and completing stuff. They don't necessarily need a challenge. You have the acrobat, which is almost the opposite. They want some freedom and they want to discover stuff, but they want it to be challenging. They want to try it over and over again. And the ninja, which is really about skill building and competition. And there are 5 more of those. Some are more like story driven or creatively driven. Other ones are more socially driven. And there's all these kind of different things that you do. So we could take a little look at the God games before. And I think if we go through it, you will see that a lot of things become more clear and it becomes easier to categorize the game and see if this game is really for you. Besides, of course, that sometimes you do want a deviation on a game that you know very well, and maybe you love survival crafter games, and you just want the next survival crafter game because you like the last one, but you're kind of done with it. You just want to go to the next one with your pals. You want to play Valheim or something like that. You're done with that. You want something new. But sometimes you're looking for something new, or maybe you don't know what you're looking for, and by thinking about these categories, you kind of like, oh, I could get in the mood for a social game or a challenge. So let's take a look at it. So let's take a look at Populous first. So when you think about Populous, hands over head, it's an RTS and it plays really like an RTS. You have to be fast and that kind of stuff. So it's really in the middle with hands over head. So if you're looking for a puzzle or you're looking for really something just, to do, it's not there. It's not really what Populous is. Maybe you're skilled enough in both, or you have a high tolerance of both, so it doesn't really matter for you. But it doesn't really lean one way or the other. It doesn't really push one way or the other. Then there's the commitment, the time commitment. It's an RTS with a pretty lengthy campaign. The things you unlock over time, and it takes us quite some commitment to grow in that fantasy of the game. But then we get to the really interesting part for me, and that is sort of these motivations instead of tags. So of course we could talk about tags like, oh, it's prehistoric, or it has a god vibe and it has great nation, it's an RTS. You could write all these things, all these tags that connect it one to another. But for me, the things that really would make it shine is if you would have like a list of these kind of things. So first and foremost, I would say that Populous is very good at giving you destruction. The thing that a lot of people remember about Populous is casting an earthquake, a volcano, or tornado on an enemy village. It feels great and it's really fun to do. If you like that kind of stuff, you will like Populous. It doesn't really matter that much what the theming is, it's just another way to do destruction. It is there and it's really good. The second is power. So that you're playing that shaman, and that shaman is just extremely powerful and gets even more powerful over time. And growing that power, getting stronger, 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 and bigger and bigger and bigger spells, and being able to solo a whole village at some point of the game is very satisfying. If you really like that power growth, if you really like, I was just a small little shaman who could only cast a fireball, but after 20 hours of playing, I can summon an angel of death, or rain down a meteor, or sink a whole city into the ocean. It's really cool. And going through that motion is something that Populous does very well. Then you have the fantasy. You are really being drawn into a different world here. The music is very minimalistic, it's very tribal. The power fantasy just works very well with the idea of what you're doing with the fantasy that you're having. So it has a strong fantasy to it. And of course, there's also a strategy game involvement. I would say these ones are less important. There is a strategy involvement here, like how I'm going to solve this scenario, and I need to think out well to go for my challenges. But a lot of people don't really care about this, and I wouldn't say it's the thing that makes Populous so strongly, even though it's definitely there. And the same goes for discovery. In discovery, I mean not discovering the world. The world are not so diverse. There's not much to discover in the sense of what is there, but there is a lot to discover in the sense of how I can play the game. Using land bridges to create walls of nature, or sinking a part of the city into the ocean so you can pass very nicely. It has this experimental vibe to it. This is already a very different way of looking at the game than just saying like it's an RTS God game. Because if we go to the next RTS God game, you see that there is some overlap, but it's also quite different. Black and White has sort of the same profile in how long you play it and what kind of actions you're doing. You could still say it's an RTS, it's still a God game, all that kind of stuff. But the fantasy is much more important in Black and White. You are the God, your mouse is the hand of God. It really feels like that. You're slapping your creatures around, you're picking up rocks, you're throwing them away. It really feels like you are in the fantasy of being a god. Same, that scales very well with that power fantasy. You still can, you know, grow and show that your creature is getting stronger and your influence rises and you're becoming a more and more powerful god. Destruction again is very important. I wouldn't give it the same place as a Populous, because it takes much longer to get a satisfying point of destruction into the game, and it still doesn't feel the same as in an RTS where you can just blow up a whole army. But still, there you can still throw your rocks at buildings and be an agent of chaos. It's still very strong. And then you have that AI animal which you have to discover and that you have to train and see what it does and see how it reacts to the villages and how the villages react to you. So there's this tinkering mechanic going on as well. And yeah, it's still an RTS, but as you can see, the RTS vibe is getting on a lower point of the game. You could see between Populous and Black and White that Black and White's more of a fantasy, more of an RPG almost, while Populous is more of an RTS, more of a strategy game. They still have the same kind of do and vibes things to do, but seeing them at different levels, or where the motivations lay, you can kind of find out that I'm actually more of a fantasy player, and I can see that because I like black and white more than I like Populous. Populous was cool and all, and I like being the shaman, but what I really liked was how much I felt like a god when I was playing black and white. And then we go to World Box, and it's already a very, very, very different game. Data motivation design seems to be much more important. You're creating this. It's a very creative game. You're creating this world. You want to see how it works. You want to discover what the people are doing. You're making something for these people and see how they interact with this world. That has a strong anthill vibe to it. Very, very, very different from the two games that we saw before. Yes, again, they're both God games. They both have the same color, they both have the same vibe, but what you're doing and why you're doing it is very different. Destruction, on the other hand, still seems to be important. So you can see this profile already turning out like, hey, this is actually an easier way to talk about a God game. Destruction seems to be a very important part. And again, fantasy, you do still feel quite like a god when you're playing it. It's less, there's not this god hand, it's more menus, it's more plumping down. Um, More selecting options, but it's still there. It's still something that you're doing. We can also see that the time investment is a lot lower also in World Box. It's not a campaign game anymore, but it still has the good card game vibe. And then we get to the one that's the oddest of them all, which would be Reus. So the first thing that really is different in Reus is how it's much more of a mind game than a do game. The game is much more about planning, it's more about thinking, it's about making a perfect ecosystem, and it is relaxing, but it's also a thinking process. It has more in line with, playing a Sudoku or something like that, which can be relaxing, than it has to do with Worldbox, where you just do whatever you want willy nilly. There's really a world that reacts to you, and what you do matters a lot. There's not everything what you do matters, so you have to think about it. And the time investment again is a lot smaller. But you can also see on the core motivations of the game that it's a very different game from the other ones. We see challenge, which we haven't seen in the other ones. So, really getting a challenge and see how far you can get and how good you are at the game is much more of an important part of Reus than it is of any of the other games. You still have the discovery aspect, but it's in the form of the challenge. Like, what is the good combinations? More like in Slay the Spire, what are good card combinations? Or in Civilization, what are good terrains for me to settle for this character or for this leader, and which wonder should I go for? Strategy, much more important in Reus 2 than it is in the other games. I would, we could even color code it how strong these are. But thinking ahead and thinking what kind of planet you're creating for who is basically the core thing that you're doing in the game. It's really a mind thing. And completion, which we haven't seen in the other ones, getting achievements, making sure that you saw everything that there is to see, have the collectibles of the humans inventing that kind of stuff. Completion is much more of a part of the game. And now we can kind of see why all those reviews are trying to communicate that the game is different from the other games, because if we look at the God games, we see a certain pattern arise that we didn't see before. So for once, they're both doing and they're thinking. So they are very tactile in some sort of way. Reus being more of an RTS and not having these direct, easy do things, but being more of a turn-based game is much more on the thinking side. It's something that a lot of people probably would either hate or love. If you like a turn-based game like Civilization, or you like a turn-based game like Slay the Spire, it might be more appealing to you than you think. Uh, and we also see the core motivations being quite different from Reus. So destruction and power seems to be a thing that is all those other games have. So people maybe are just looking for destruction and power. They're looking for that fantasy that you have all these things in your hand and you're becoming bigger and you're becoming stronger and you're destroying stuff. Fantasy might also be here in case of you could switch power for fantasy, that you really feel that you are the god. In Reus, that's less the case because you have avatars that are doing your bidding for you, which removes a layer of direct fantasy interaction that you have. And discovery strategy is things that are there. I think it fits well with the themes of tribal and nature as well, but they seem to be less important. So if we talk about God games, is this actually what we're talking about? But on the other hand, shouldn't we be talking more about these core motivations? Wouldn't it be more easy for us to see what kind of game we're actually gonna play or we actually want? Maybe I'm in a mood for a destruction game. I'm gonna look for destruction games in these themes. I want a destruction game and I want it to be medieval. Oh, I'm gonna get Total Accurate Battle Simulator, or I'm gonna get Age of Empires 2 or 4. Uh, it becomes a little bit more interesting. I'm looking for a discovery game and I'm looking for it in space. Well, maybe I will get some tinkering kind of games, maybe something like Stellaris, but I might also just get No Man's Sky or Homeworld, that kind of stuff where you can really discover the whole world, and that's an important part of the game. So maybe that would be a more interesting way to look at games and how you're doing things. Maybe also for reviewers, but certainly for us as gamers when we're looking at Steam. So that's basically what I want to talk about. It's something that we making Reus and also trying to get people to try out Reus is something that we often find. It's close to our heart. We made 3 God games, and they all are very different from each other in various ways. And finding out the core of what something actually means is important for us, but it's also important, I think, for you as gamers. Um, I mean, we just are looking for fun ways to do something and talking about motivations and what kind of fun you want to have besides the theming and besides what you're doing might be something that you're going for. So who knows? Maybe it will be an easy way for you to improve your reviews or be more informative about your reviews. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope you have a great TactiCon. Thank you.